Back in 2017, it kind of felt like handhelds were dying. But then the Nintendo Switch came out, and it almost instantly became the console that launched 1,000 competing devices. I mean, just think about it. The recent explosion in portable PC gaming hardware is almost directly attributable to the OG Switch. With the Switch, Nintendo proved that you could have a hybrid device that could easily play games on your TV, but was also small enough to take with you pretty much anywhere. And it felt like magic. But the big question is that when it came to replacing the Switch, what was Nintendo gonna do? Were they gonna totally change everything up again? Or were they gonna kind of stick closer to the original Switch's template? Well, now we know, because the Switch 2 is here, and instead of just keeping everything the same, Nintendo did something even better. They gave us more of everything we already love. The Switch 2's design is probably the most obvious example of Nintendo not straying too far from the original's template. So let's take a closer look. Okay, so here we have a regular non-OLED Switch up top, and then the Switch 2 down bottom. And just even at a brief glance, you can tell the screen on the Switch 2 looks so much better. It's brighter, it's sharper, it's more colorful, it's everything you want, and it has slightly smaller bezels too. But then if you look around at other areas, you kind of notice the buttons are a little bit bigger. The analog sticks are a little bit bigger. One really nice thing, it has magnetic Joy-Cons now. And all you have to do is there's a little button in back and it snaps on and off. My colleague Devindra wrote an entire story about how satisfying it is to attach because you get a really nice thunk. And surprisingly, even though it's a magnetic attachment system, it feels a lot more stable and sturdy now too. All around, it's just a really big upgrade. We flip it around to the bottom, you have bottom USB-C port, and this is important because the one on the bottom is the only one that supports video out. This is the one you're gonna use when you throw this thing into the dock. And then along top, you have a slot for game carts, and you notice that Nintendo Switch 2 carts are now red instead of black. Right next to here, we have a 3.5mm audio jack, another USB-C port, which is really, really nice, and then your ambient light sensor, volume rocker, and your power/sleep button. I gotta shout out, the kickstand on the Switch 2 is so much nicer. You can put it on a table like that, but you can also kind of flip it all the way up, and now it becomes sort of like more of an easel thing, and it's just really sturdy and a lot more flexible. Another really cool thing is that not one, but both Joy-Cons, there is a little sensor. You can put it on a table, your leg, or even the arm of a sofa, and you can use it as a mouse. So supported games are like Civilization 7, Cyberpunk, and while it's not out yet, I did get to try a preview of Metroid Prime 4 Beyond, and that's actually my favorite way to play shooters, at least on the Switch, because I'm more of a mouse and keyboard guy, and so this is closer, and it gives you surprisingly good fidelity. Nintendo did come up with a new version of HD Rumble 2, and it's not a completely revolutionary experience, but it does feel a little bit sensor. Vibrations are noticeably stronger. Now, in terms of pure physical dimensions, the Switch 2 is definitely larger than the original Switch. It's about 10.7 inches wide, about 4.5 inches tall, and about 0.55 inches thick, depending on where you're measuring. But the nice thing about that is because with a bigger Switch 2, you also have more room for a bigger display. So we're talking 7.9 inches across instead of 6.2 on the original Switch. And that's a pretty big increase without really changing the size and portability of the Switch 2. Finally, for all you PC gaming handheld fans out there, let me put the Switch 2 next to a Steam Deck. And you can see that the Steam Deck is even wider, and because it has bigger grips, which I admit the Switch 2 doesn't have the most ergonomic design, but it's definitely sleeker and noticeably more portable than almost all of its PC-based brethren. Now for its display, the Switch 2's 7.9-inch LCD is a significant upgrade over the panel on its predecessor. Not only is it larger, up from 6.2 inches, it's also higher res, 1080p versus 720p, and it boasts a 120Hz refresh rate and support for HDR. When it came time to testing, with its auto brightness setting turned off, the screen tops out at around 400 nits. though in titles that support HDR, or if you turn that ambient light setting on, it can go up to about 450, maybe a little bit higher than that. The downside is that because Nintendo didn't go with an OLED panel, it doesn't get those pure inky blacks that you get from the OLED Switch or a modern flagship smartphone. Meanwhile, when it's docked, the Switch 2 can send out up to 4K at 60 FPS or 1440p at 120 FPS. Though it's really important to remember, those settings won't be available in every single game. The developers need to program it in from the beginning. One other really quick thing is that sadly, the console doesn't support VRR when it's docked. You only get variable refresh rates on its native display. On the bright side, you do get support for auto low latency mode, which is nice for anyone who needs those extra fast response times in more competitive games. Now, I gotta admit, when it comes to judging performance, trying to gauge the horsepower of a brand new console is really difficult because it often takes months or more likely years for developers to truly optimize their software for a new platform. Inside, the Switch 2 features a custom chip from NVIDIA, which NVIDIA says has 10 times the graphics power of the original Switch. Now, obviously that's a pretty big number, but we don't have a ton of benchmarks right now to really support NVIDIA's claims. You also get support for features like DLSS and ray tracing, and the Switch 2 comes with 12 gigs of RAM and 256 gigs of onboard storage, which can be further expanded via a microSD express card. And that's really important because regular microSD cards don't work. You gotta look for the EX or the express label that's printed directly on the microSD card itself. That said, first-party titles like Mario Kart World run beautifully. I can't say enough about how good that game looks. The only hint of stuttering I've seen is if it's really doing some serious multitasking, like if you're playing 4-player local co-op and you have game chat with some video streaming going on all at the same time. And even then, the stuttering is pretty subtle, so you're only really gonna notice it unless you're just kind of pixel peeping and really looking for issues. That said, what might be the biggest indicator of the Switch 2's improved performance is the sheer number of major AAA games that have already been ported to the Switch 2 at launch. We're talking about games like Cyberpunk 2077, which looks really good. Unless you're looking at it side by side, it's really difficult to tell where kind of Nintendo or CD Projekt Red is kind of cutting the corners to make it work on the Switch 2. Then there are other titles like Street Fighter 6, which still look pretty good, but it's not quite as impressive as some of the kind of more fancier effects, especially during special moves. You might notice that they don't look quite as good as you would expect if you were playing it on PC or even a PS5 or Xbox Series X. But don't get me wrong, as someone who criticized the underpowered performance of the original Switch, it's clear the Switch 2 offers a significant upgrade in total horsepower, and I think it's going to be able to support this console for its entire life cycle. Now, obviously, we have some new games to the Switch 2, but one of the best things about this platform is that it's backwards compatible with a huge number of original Switch games. We're talking way over 90%. There are some issues, especially with games like Ring Fit Adventure, where the size of the larger Joy-Cons for the Switch 2, they don't fit in the accessory straps that came with Ring Fit Adventure. That said, the Switch 2 is also backwards compatible with a lot of the original Switch's accessories. So if you still want to play Ring Fit Adventure on your Switch 2, you can take a Joy-Con from the original Switch and pair it with the Switch 2, and then you can use all the old accessories, and that still works pretty good. One other kind of really high-profile bug is in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, where if you're playing with a Mii Fighter right now, it can completely crash the system. Thankfully, Nintendo is aware of it, and they're working on it, and there's a big official compatibility list online from Nintendo, so if you're wondering which old Switch games work, you can go on there and check it out. Honestly, the real treat is that a lot of older Switch games just run and look and play better on the Switch 2. Now, for some games like Legend of the Zelda Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, there are dedicated upgrade packs that add support for features like HDR, way better frame rates, and just better looking graphics overall. And if you remember how good Breath of the Wild looked when it first came out, go play it again with the Switch 2 version. It looks even better than you remember, and that's kind of saying something. I also want to say, Super Mario Odyssey looks incredible, but I think the game that got the biggest upgrade is Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. And the free upgrade for that adds more monster density, better draw distance, and better frame rates, and just the game plays and looks so much smoother. Had Pokemon Scarlet and Violet launched like it is on the Switch 2 right now, back in 2022, Nintendo could have instantly sidestepped one of the biggest criticisms against those games. Now, another major addition for the Switch 2 is Nintendo's built-in game chat feature. And you can kind of think of it like adding a lot of the stuff that we like about Discord just natively onto the Switch 2. And it's really cool because even on the right Joy-Con and stuff like the Pro Controller, there's a built-in C button that is basically a shortcut that takes you right into game chat. Once you set it up, all you have to do is you can create new lobbies based on your friends list, or you can actually create kind of permanent lobbies so that anytime you or your friends are on, you can just hop in there and see who's playing. And then there's the ability to share your video gameplay too. You can have up to 4 video streams on the same display at once and up to 12 people in a single lobby. So there's plenty of room for people to hop in and out as they feel like it. And if you are so inclined and you get a camera for the Switch 2, you can even put your face down in the corner of the window. But generally, it's really easy to use. There's a couple basic layouts that can have video screen sharing or not. You can even have a kind of a speech to text option if you want people to kind of read what you're saying instead of just listen to you only. And one thing that I really like about Game Chat is that it doesn't even matter if everyone in the same lobby is playing the same game. Obviously, the one caveat to all this is that in order to use Game Chat, you do need a subscription to Nintendo Switch Online, which at the very minimum is going to run you about $20 a year. Like the console, Nintendo didn't stray too far from the design of the original Switch's dock for the Switch 2. It's a little bit bigger, it's a little bit rounder, and it's a little bit more polished, but if you've used the original Switch's dock, this will be very familiar. There's a handful of ports in back. There's a USB-C for power, an HDMI port, and a dedicated Ethernet jack for people who want wired internet, which is really nice. The issue is that there's actually one less USB-C port on the dock than before, and it gets really awkward because actually both of those extra USB ports are USB-A instead of USB-C. Where things get awkward is that the official Switch 2's camera comes with a double-sided USB-C cord in the box. That means if you want to plug it into the dock, you either got to get an adapter, a new cord, or you got to get some sort of USB hub. The other option is you can just plug it into the Switch 2 itself, but that means every time you dock and undock the Switch 2, you're going to have to unplug the camera as well, and that just gets a little annoying. I really wish Nintendo had gone full USB-C on the new dock because I think that would have simplified and streamlined a lot of these issues. The other big addition to the Switch 2's dock is that you can't see it, but there is now a fan inside. It's not super loud, but I do appreciate that addition because it adds a little bit of extra cooling to help make sure that when it's docked and it is maybe doing some higher performance things, you are going to get better sustained graphics and frame rates. The Switch 2 features a 5220 mAh battery, which according to Nintendo should last between 2 and 6.5 hours on a charge. That's a pretty big range, and it depends a lot on specifically what game you're playing and what brightness levels you have the display set to. So when it came time to testing these, I decided to test the Switch 2 with brightness turned all the way up, which is about 400 nits, and the ambient brightness setting turned off. And then I just played a few different games from 100% battery until the Switch 2 was dead. In Mario Kart World, the Switch 2 lasted 2 hours and 23 minutes, which is definitely on the lower end of Nintendo's official estimate. Meanwhile, in the Switch 2 edition of Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, the console did a little bit better with a time of 2 hours and 56 minutes. That said, the game with the best battery life I've tested so far is Puyo Puyo Tetris 2S at 4 hours and 15 minutes, which probably shouldn't be a big surprise as it is a port of a decade-old 2D title. Now, for some people, those times might be a little disappointing, and I would certainly take an extra 30 to 60 minutes of battery life any day. That said, when compared to rival devices like the Steam Deck or the ROG Ally X, the Switch 2 is on a same playing field or a little bit better on average, so it's not like it's falling behind any of its competitors. Some other small additions that Nintendo made to the Switch 2 is that now there's a charging limit, so if you want to set the battery to stop at 90%, that can be a really good way to help sustain the battery's health level over time, so you kind of get those really good run times throughout your console's lifecycle. But actually, one thing I really like, and it's a really small detail, is that now, because the dock doesn't entirely cover the Switch 2 screen, when you put it in the dock, it'll actually flash up a little battery icon so that you know when it's charging. Small thing, but it's a really nice peace of mind kind of thing. Now, obviously, the Switch 2 at $450 or $500 if you get that Mario Kart World bundle represents a pretty jump up from the $300 launch price of the original Switch. Now, granted, that gap isn't quite as big when you adjust for inflation. It's more a jump of about $50, but still, between the console itself, games, and online services like NSO, You're talking about a pretty significant investment if you'd want to get a new game playing console. Here's the breakdown for what I spent on my Switch 2. I got a standalone console alongside physical carts for Mario Kart World and Breath of the Wild NS2 Edition, and one Pro Controller. In grand total, that came up to $745.75. Of course, when you tack on a year subscription of NSO Online plus the expansion pack, that's another $50. So I'm looking at, all told, just shy of $800. I can't tell you how much to spend and how much disposable income you have, but that is a lot. So it's definitely something to consider before you go out and buy a Switch 2 for yourself or for someone you love. Okay, time for some final thoughts. And it's really interesting because the old adage goes, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But with the Switch 2, Nintendo did something even smarter. It maintained the console's iconic hybrid design, and then it made everything a lot better. Its screen is bigger and brighter, buttons are larger, and the magnetic Joy-Con are so much easier to snap on and off. Even features like the kickstand and expandable storage feel like they've gotten substantial upgrades thanks to a wider range of motion and support for faster micro SD express cards. I also just really appreciate the addition of a second USB-C port. It's just really handy. The Switch 2 has everything that made the original Switch so great, but now there's even more of it to enjoy. Granted, Nintendo's latest console is more expensive, but as the successor to a legendary console that almost single-handedly revived gaming handhelds, this thing feels like it's worth it.